Welcome to the Chase Challenge Week 20. This week, David is back in Jerusalem. All the drama from last week is over. Not that the drama is completely over. David is once again the established king over all of Israel, and he's reigning from Jerusalem. But this week's reading begins with David saying, "The Lord reigns." Even though David is king over all of Israel, reigning from Jerusalem, experiencing a great deal of prosperity, greatness, power, and authority, he recognizes that there is a greater king. Even though David is ruling and reigning in the here and now, God is reigning over all creation. From the beginning of time to the end of time and beyond into eternity. David related to God as creator. David related to God as father. But David also related to God as king. And this king has a purpose for today. He has a plan for the future, and he isn't going to stop keeping his promises from the past. And we've seen this throughout all of our chronological reading up to this point. Guys, we're at week 20. We're not that far from halfway through our journey through the Bible in 1 year, reading it in chronological order. And I hope you've seen that God is king. He is king of the present, king of the future, and king of the past. We've seen his promise to Adam way back at the beginning in the Garden of Eden, when he promised Adam that he would send someone who would defeat the devil. Then we saw his promises to Noah when he said, "I will never destroy the entire earth through a worldwide flood again." Then we saw his promises to Abraham. He told Abraham, remember the 3 things he promised Abraham? I will give you a land. I will give you a nation that is so large that you'll have more people than all the stars in the sky. He also promised Abraham that through him and his descendants, the whole world would be blessed. After Abraham came Moses. God gave Moses the law and the instructions for building the tabernacle. God told Moses, "I'm bringing you to a land." All of these people, these descendants of Abraham, have become a numerous people, and I'm giving you the law that will help bring them into a cohesive nation, and I'm giving you instructions for the tabernacle, which is how you will meet with me, how you will experience my presence. And now we come to David. 2 of God's promises to Abraham have been fulfilled, and David is experiencing the fulfillment of those promises because he's living in the promised land. God gave them the land that he had promised to them, and David is the one that's ruling and reigning over it. The people of Israel had grown into a nation. They were now a kingdom. There was a promise that was not yet fulfilled. God's promise to Adam that someone would come to defeat Satan, that hadn't happened. And the ambiguous promise to Abraham that through him the whole world would be blessed. Well, a lot of people were blessed by King David's reign. He was not a blessing to the whole world. God, as king, still had promises to fulfill from the past and plans for the future. But what happens when what we want and our plans collide with God's plans? What happens when the king of Israel, who's so powerful and mighty and revered, exalted, wants to do something, but the king of all creation, the king of all the world, says no? I have a different plan for you. David said, the Lord reigns. David, who had so many people under him that he ruled and reigned over, he called the shots in Israel. That David said, no, the Lord reigns. David had an intense desire to build a temple for God. You see, the Ark of the Covenant, where God's presence resided, was in Jerusalem. But the tabernacle, where the Ark was originally intended to reside, as God had told Moses on Mount Sinai, the tabernacle was in a place called Gibeon. And that's where the altar was. So David's desire was to build a magnificent temple in the center of Jerusalem, where the Ark of the Covenant could reside, where the altar could reside, sacrifices could take place there, and the worship of God could take place in this magnificent temple. That was David's plan for his life. He was really consumed with this desire. He wanted to do this more than anything. It was a huge dream of his. But a couple of weeks ago, we saw that God told David, no, that's not what I have for you. I don't want you to build the temple. I know you want to build a house for me, David, a temporary house that will not last forever. But I want to build a house for you, an eternal house, an eternal kingdom. God was telling David that he, through his descendants, wanted to bring something to pass that would be eternal, not just temporal. God had a different plan. God had a different purpose for David's life. And when our purposes conflict with God's purposes for us, what is there to do? What is there to do but open our hands and say, God, nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will for my life. The Lord reigns. So David related to God as king over all creation. But that doesn't mean that David wasn't tempted to cling to his own will and his own accumulations, his own achievements, and maybe in an effort to enjoy his own accomplishments, his own success, David decides to take a census. I have 5 questions for you this week. Number 1, at the beginning, when the census is mentioned, the reason for God's anger over David taking the census is not made clear. Later on in the week, you will find out why God was angry with David for taking the census. What specifically is said about why God did not want David to take the census of Israel? Number 2, even though David wasn't the one to build the temple that he so greatly desired to do, what did David do to prepare for the building of the temple? Give me details. To what extent was David involved in the preparations for the building of the temple? At one point in this week's reading, David gathers all the leaders of Israel, and he assembles all of them, and he gives this great speech. What reason did David give to all the leaders as to why he was not the one to build the temple? Number 4, at that same meeting, David reveals who the next king of Israel should be. He tells them that God has chosen this man to be the next king of Israel. Who is it? Finally, what did David give up to the building of the temple? What did he donate? And how did the leaders of Israel respond to what David gave? As you're reading this week, you relate to God as King in your life. Ask the Lord to show you the areas of your life where you're clinging to your own will, your own way, or maybe your own accomplishments or possessions. And ask Him to give you open hands that say, okay, God, this is what I want. This is what I desire. But you know what? Your will, your eternal plan is even greater, even better than my will or my plan. Your possessions, everything you have, as you will see in this week's reading, everything belongs to the Lord. He's the one that's given it to us anyway. So let's open our hands. Let's pray and open all of our possessions to the Lord. It all belongs to Him. Let's not hang on to these things. Let Him be king in our life as it comes to our possessions. And then finally, our accomplishments. Everything that we accomplish in this life is by the grace of God and Him alone. We are here on this earth to fulfill His purposes, not ours. We are His hands, His feet. So let our accomplishments not be ours, but the hand and work of the Almighty King. Next week, we're going to get into some more drama. So get ready. Don't stop reading, and I'll see you next week.